Hi, it's Datache, and as a lifelong Nintendo fan, I can say with confidence that Nintendo has a very clean track record. You know, except for the Wii U, and the GameCube, and the Virtual Boy, and the Amiibo shortages, and Nintendo Switch Online, and Switch 2 prices. Okay, maybe they fuck up a lot. It's no secret there have been many Nintendo games that have missed the mark over the company's history, but did they really deserve the hate they got? Well, that's what we're here to find out, starting with
disappointment in the game of life.
Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival has what I'd consider the three main traits required to be a hated game: poor timing, shit gameplay, and disgusting monetization. Let's take these one at a time. Now, by poor timing, I don't necessarily mean release date. I'm talking more about the state that the fanbase was in, and what they were looking for at the time. Now, before New Leaf released in 2012, new Animal Crossing games were coming out every 3 to 4 years, so around the time Amiibo Festival was announced in 2015, there was already a demand for a mainline console Animal Crossing game, and people were starting to get antsy. This was made a lot worse by how bare the Wii U's library was around that time, and honestly remained for most of its lifespan. So when people found out this new game would be a board game spin-off, fans were skeptical, to say the least. That's not to say there wasn't potential in the idea. I mean, people love Mario Party, and having another fun spin-off with your favourite Animal Crossing characters playing silly games definitely has its appeal. The difference between Amiibo Festival and Mario Party, though, is that Mario Party is fun. Let's talk about the gameplay. Now, Amiibo Festival is a deeply complicated game, so I'll break it down bit by bit. Each round is an in-game day, set in the month that you're playing. Each day, every player rolls dice, moves to different spaces where the game describes different events that result in the player gaining or losing happy points or bells. The player with the most happy points at the end wins. Oh wait, is that it? There's no minigames, items, really anything more complicated than snakes and ladders. It's very bland. I like the idea of the boards changing based on the time of year and having exclusive events, but it's all very underdeveloped. The main star of the show here is the Animal Crossing Amiibo themselves. Unfortunately, they bring us to our final issue here: disgusting monetization. In Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, Amiibo are required to get past the title screen, choose your character, roll the dice. Roll the dice?! So on top of requiring the player to shell out a ton of money for any of the character Amiibo, you're gonna have to huddle around the gamepad so you don't have to get up and grab the Amiibo every time you roll the dice. The game did come with Amiibo, but the game requiring the figures to do something as basic as open the main menu means if you bought the game used or lost the Amiibo, the game was functionally useless. The one real benefit to come out of this game was the Animal Crossing line of Amiibo themselves, and even then most of them are rotting in bargain bins. But ultimately, nobody really wanted Amiibo Festival. It's not fun, and it's expensive to use properly. I can't think of a time Nintendo has misread the room this hard.
We got the first live gameplay of Metroid Prime Federation Force.
Okay, that one was pretty bad too. This section will be briefer because the game itself is fine. It's a little online co-op shooter where you and your buddies are fighting to rescue Samus. It's Nintendo, it's designed well enough, it looks nice, but it was the epitome of poor timing. Metroid as a franchise has been going on and off of life support for the past 20 years, and it's clear Nintendo has never really known what to do with it. Nintendo had been trying to mess around with the Metroid formula to bring in a wider audience, which led to the development of Other M, which was not received well, for a multitude of reasons we'll get into later. The point is, it had been 5 years since Other M, and 8 since the last game that stuck to the formula. You know, the one that made Metroid in the first place. So when Nintendo swaddled up with a random multiplayer spin-off at E3 2015, it was the ultimate middle finger to anyone invested in the franchise. As a result, the game bombed. And if Samus Returns hadn't come out the following year, I don't think Metroid would still be here today.
And the baby, for the baby, of the baby, for the baby. Baby's cry.
I mean, I did say we'd get into it later. So, like I mentioned before, Nintendo does not understand Metroid, but they want it to succeed. So they try to make it more accessible to a general audience. This doesn't work. Metroid games are usually about exploration and collecting upgrades that change your moveset and give you access to new content in old areas. It's a pretty simple but enjoyable gameplay loop. Other M strips this back, featuring linear hallways and areas that close behind you permanently once you're done exploring. No optional areas, no upgrades, no backtracking, no anything Metroid-y, honestly. The game also has a much greater emphasis on story, which would be an interesting idea, you know, if the story was good. To summarize, this game follows Samus after the events of Super Metroid, who, after following a distress signal, ends up joining a Galactic Federation mission to explore an abandoned spaceship, under the condition she follows the orders of the Commander Adam. Something I've noticed with Metroid is that anytime these games focus on the Galactic Federation, the story ends up being arse. And I think part of that is just Samus working better alone. She should definitely have characters to play off of, but the isolated and desolate atmosphere of Metroid is one of the series' strongest attributes. And when there's some dude trying to banter with her on the other end of the line, it kinda takes you out of the game. Plus, there's something really gross about Samus being reduced to this character following orders, who literally only gets new upgrades or weapons because she's authorized to do so. Like, obviously Samus doesn't talk a lot in the previous games, but she's always been characterized as a tenacious stoic with a kind heart. That's the reason the baby Metroid thing works in Super, because the game lets you interpret Samus's emotions rather than repeating them in your face a million times. Other M lacks that subtlety and just kinda lobotomizes her. This very flimsy characterization for Samus and the underwhelming gameplay has made the vast majority of the Metroid community write this game off entirely, which is pretty deserved. At the end of the day though, without this game, I don't think there would have been an effort made to step back and consider what they should do with Samus. And we certainly wouldn't have gotten Dread, which is still the best thing to come out of this series in a decade. And this certainly isn't the only time Nintendo has tried to streamline an IP for a wider audience. I think Skyward Sword has a lot of things to love. Its versions of Link and Zelda are some of the series' most expressive, and in my opinion, one of the cutest ships. There's some crazy underrated dungeon gimmicks, like the Beetle or the Lanayru Desert Time Crystals. Hell, Groose is in this game. I don't need to elaborate any further than that, but despite those qualities, this game used to be the fandom's punching bag back in the 2010s. Why? Well, for starters, the motion controls. This game relies heavily on motion controls. For its combat, items, dialogue selection, imagine turning the Wii Sports Resort sword fighting mode into a full game. The thing is, if you had a disability, or your Wiimotes just straight up weren't working, the game used to be a total pain to get through. I suspect a lot of the issues came from people not standing up and half-assing the motions, because this game uses Wii Motion Plus, which is way more sensitive than the base controllers. But I still think button options or support for another controller would have been a nice thing to implement anyway. The Switch port manages to do that, and everyone really appreciates it. Then there's the game's pretty obnoxious handholding. Meet Fi. This game's helper character who is emblematic of a lot of the game's issues, most notably in how she never shuts the fuck up. She'll tell you when to use your sword dowsing, when your battery is running low, when you need to wipe your ass. She was everything people say Navi is. And I say was because, once again, this got amended in the Switch port. Even still, I don't understand why this game was so frightened that the player would get lost, especially when this game is incredibly linear. There's still side quests and the occasional optional area to explore, but the game will mostly lead you down areas with very simple paths that occasionally loop back in on themselves. The game doesn't even have a traditional open area like Hyrule Field or the Great Sea. I mean, there's the sky, but there's barely anything to do up there. It's more of a hub world to get you to the three main areas of the game, which is another gripe people have. Rather than have one large interconnected world, there is the sky, and then 3 sub-worlds that you explore. I think having them as areas you literally unlock access to gives the game a nice sense of progression, but also makes the world feel smaller and more segmented. Plus, the fact you spend most of the game revisiting the same 3 locations over and over is kind of frustrating. Near the end, the game has some real pacing issues. The last batch of revisits could have been cut out entirely. But I think the biggest reason Skyward Sword attracted so much hate back in the day was because it showed fans that the 3D Zelda formula was getting stale. Enter new area, meet some freaks, enter a dungeon, get an item, throw the item at the boss's giant video game eyeball, and repeat. They got the Zelda formula down to a science with Ocarina of Time and its follow-ups. And they kinda just kept doing that, although as these games progress, you can feel the worlds become more linear, and I think Skyward Sword was just a wake-up call to that. But similar to Other M, if Skyward Sword hadn't released, the devs never would have been forced to shift gears and open up the games with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Hell, a lot of Breath of the Wild mechanics originate from Skyward Sword, like stamina, climbing, the paraglider, skydiving. In the time since the game was released, I think a lot of these elements are now able to be appreciated, mainly because of how they were developed in future games, but also because there isn't a whole internet shitstorm when the game is mentioned now. Plus, this game has Groose. What other video game could top this level of raw sex appeal? Ah, shit. When Xenoblade Chronicles released on the Wii in 2011, it was met with tons of praise for its unique world and story, lovable characters, and innovative MMO-like battle mechanics. This game was so loved by its relatively small fanbase that a fan campaign called Operation Rainfall was formed to try and get the game released in the US, which, while not technically responsible for it being brought over, was definitely a factor. Point is, that game is deeply loved by its players, which is why it's insane that the sequel had such a mixed response online. Now, part of that is definitely because this was the first Xenoblade game to have an actual audience, and for whatever reason, a lot of core Nintendo fans have this weird aversion to JRPGs that don't have Mario or Joker Persona 5 in it.
Oh god, it's a Nintendo fan's worst nightmare! Nintendo game!
But I also think that a lot of the criticism this game got on release is warranted. The most obvious being
The name's Dahlia.
this. Xenoblade Chronicles, especially on the Wii, had a very grounded, scrappy sci-fi aesthetic. The original Wii game went for more realistic-looking models, which, let's be honest, looked like arse, but fit the generally serious tone that the game went for. Xenoblade 2 went in the complete opposite direction, with a light-hearted anime aesthetic, filled with characters with big-ass eyes and, other big things. This game's tone was completely at odds with the first games, and it's no mystery why they shifted back to a more serious vibe for Xenoblade 3. The anime look is technically more accurate to the Xeno series' roots, but to anyone only familiar with the first game, it would give them serious whiplash. That's on top of the character designs being a real mixed bag. There are some fun ones, but the designers are bogged down by some serious same-face syndrome, and their desperate attempts to make sexy designs sometimes come off as really questionable. There was one other pain point from back when this game released, and it's the protagonist, Rex. Rex is supposed to be a naive, idealist kid, someone whose hopeful outlook and belief in the land of Elysium and a better life for the people he cares about will help bring about a change in a cynical, dying world. Sort of like Lloyd Irving from Tales of Symphonia. And on its own, I think that makes for a compelling character. I think there were two main issues though. One is that Rex is kind of boring. He doesn't have a ton of charisma or presence, and he's ultimately kind of a retread of the most bog-standard hero's journey template that most JRPG protagonists go on. When compared to a character like Shulk, who's driven initially as part of a revenge quest, but through that journey develops a more nuanced view of how his world works, while also developing self-confidence and the ability to face his future head-on, it's kind of a step down. The other issue with Rex is his voice actor. I don't like Rex's voice actor. I don't think anyone does, I'm sorry. This could be a direction thing, but the dub for the first game is so goddamn strong. When placed side by side with Adam Howden's performance as Shulk, it's no contest.
I'll kill you!
Which sucks, because I do think Xenoblade 2 has some really cool ideas and characters, but they're buried so deep beneath a ton of issues, it can be hard to convince people to give it a try. Although luckily enough for us, the next thing is something that nobody should be trying. Hate. Let me tell you how I've come to hate Paper Mario Sticker Star on the Nintendo 3DS. Yes, unfortunately, I am one of those people who's overly opinionated about Paper Mario. So what? There is a lot of valid reasons to not like this game. For example, the battle system. Now, the Paper Mario series was known for its turn-based combat. You know the deal. Get your enemy's HP to 0, press button prompts at the right time to do extra damage and guard against attacks, yada yada. Sticker Star was technically a return to form after Super Paper Mario, which is a 2D platformer with light RPG elements. But Sticker Star manages to remove all the cool stuff RPGs have. There's still turn-based combat and pressing A at the right time, but instead of a suite of options, you have stickers. These are one-time use items that act as your attacks, items, and whatever else you may bring into a fight. And conceptually, I really like this idea. It's like having a Mario deck builder. An indie game called Wonder Stars does a very similar concept quite well, where you combine words to make shonen anime attacks, with each word having individual cooldown speeds rather than being used up. But because stickers are one-time use items, Sticker Star doesn't incentivize you to use them, or fight for that matter, because you don't get any experience points for winning a battle. You get coins, and maybe some stickers, but both of those are resources that you already get in abundance across the game world, which makes battling functionally useless. Which wouldn't really be an issue if the battles were fun, but they're not. There's no strategy like the previous games, since you can't pick which enemies you target, and Mario is your only party member. And then there's the boss fights, which are battles against enemies with insanely bloated HP pools, which are designed to be weakened with a specific thing sticker, which are powerful screen nukes you can find in the overworld. The problem is that the game usually won't tell you what you need beforehand, and thing stickers take up a lot of space in your inventory, so you either end up having to use process of elimination or pull up a guide. It's all very half-baked, and it isn't helped by how underdeveloped the world design is, since it's changed to be a set of linear course clear levels instead of one large interconnected world. And also how there isn't really any characters, or story, or anything that will make you want to keep playing. Paper Mario was never Shakespeare, but brought a lot of charm to the Mario universe, transforming generic toads and enemies into little characters with backstories, motivations, and arcs. This game is a generic Bowser kidnaps Peach plot that has one opening cutscene and no real meaningful plot progression until the end. Bowser doesn't even talk in this game, and he's usually the funniest character. Then, on an artistic level, even though the arts and crafts aesthetic is probably the best the series had up to that point, the game is very bland. It uses the generic grassland, desert, swamp, snow, jungle, lava you see in basically every Mario game. And in a very similar vein, every NPC and enemy are just generic characters you'd find in a new Super Mario Bros. Game. To my knowledge, Sticker Star only has 2 original designs, which you can see on screen right now. And if you couldn't tell, I think this is pretty lame. The worst part about this game though is that just by existing, it made a lot of other games worse. For whatever reason, during development, the devs were limited to only use pre-existing Mario characters, and they handled this in the most boring way possible. But around the same time, this decision started spreading into other games, like the Mario and Luigi series, the sports games. It was weird. It ushered in an era of boring Mario, where nobody was doing anything weird or original with the characters anymore. We've only started to recover from that in the last few years, but that dry spell before Odyssey was bad. But now that we seem to be in a Mario RPG renaissance, with the Mario RPG remake, Mario and Luigi's return, and a remake of Thousand Year Door, I can only hope the future is bright for the Mario RPGs.
Pikachu!
It's the
Now, you might be asking, Datache, which Pokemon game gets the most hate? And that's kind of a trick question because the answer is basically all of them. Since like Gen 3, there has not been a Pokemon game released without some sort of controversy, and there is a very specific reason why, which we will get to. Other than Game Freak being kind of incompetent. Gen 3 was given a lot of shit at launch for players not being able to transfer their Pokemon from the Game Boy Color games. Gen 4's slow gameplay and unvaried regional decks had to be addressed in Platinum, and it's why you basically never see anyone talk about Diamond and Pearl when discussing Gen 4. It's always Platinum. Then we get to the more interesting examples. These days, people look back at the Gen 5 Pokemon games as the peak of the franchise. The more involved story, the completely new regional decks, the limited 3D, which is just so charming. But back when they released, people hated these games. I spent most of my childhood hearing YouTubers making fun of some of the designs, Team Plasma's motivations, and the fact that they couldn't use their Gen 1 Blorbos in the main game. And funny enough, I think Game Freak overcorrected on this stuff when making Gen 6. Those games were received pretty well on release, but nowadays they're a little more contentious, mainly because of the nostalgia pandering and the low difficulty. It's almost as if public sentiment can change over time. I wonder where I'm going with this. The most recent two games, Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet, have been controversial each for their own reasons, but I won't be surprised if opinion begins to sway again over the next decade. And that is because when these games come out, the discussion on the internet will be dominated by people who are older and more able to get these games themselves, and superfans that were already in these online spaces. But as time passes and people with fresher perspectives come in, overlooked aspects of these games can start to be talked about. And of course, this isn't exclusive to Pokemon. The Zelda fandom has a whole ass name for this phenomenon, the Zelda cycle, where public opinion shifts in a predictable way each time a new game comes out, with people glazing the newest game and shitting on the older ones. But what am I trying to say with this? Hell, with this whole video? Well, in part, it's that Nintendo's track record is pretty shaky, and that Nintendo fans have always had stuff to complain about. But also the fact that our opinions on these games aren't set in stone. People change their mind on stuff all the time, and I think it's worthwhile to try and avoid the voices of others sometimes to form your own opinions on stuff. I'm bringing attention to this because there's basically a whole YouTube meta based entirely off of hating on Nintendo, and I personally think engaging with that stuff is pretty bad for your health. I don't think it's ever bad to be critical of things you enjoy, but remember that playing and talking about video games is supposed to be fun, and if it's not, then it's okay to take a step back. The world is already giving us enough reasons to be bummed out, and I don't think hobby spaces like that should be ruled by negativity. But with that, I think that's the end of today's video. What games did you think did or didn't deserve the hate? Is there anything I missed in this video? Let me know in the comments below, and until later, I'll see you guys in the next one. Hey there, thanks for watching the video. Now, I just wanted to give everyone a quick update on the state of the channel since I haven't uploaded in about half a year. Recently, I started a new job, and I'm also working on a webcomic called Tech Support, which is about a cyborg girl who fights her inventor dad's wacky inventions. That's been taking up a lot of my time, but I hope we can get more news out by the end of the year. But in the meantime, I'm hoping to get 2 or 3 more videos out. If you want to stay updated, please follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Alright, that's everything. I'll see you goobers in the next one.